All right, hello everybody, this is Prowl, and we are going to react to some big news that was given to us by Rhykker a few days ago. I know this has been covered by a few people already, but I wanted to cover it because I want to give that perspective from a person that's a little bit more in the normie realm of things, as opposed to people that have been playing Diablo and ARPGs like nonstop for the last like 10 plus years. So if that's you, or even if it's not you, stick around because we're going to watch some great information here from Rhykker, and then we're going to kind of just comment on what some of these things mean and elaborate a little bit on them to just add some context for those that may not know it.
Hey folks, this is Rhykker, and I got to co-host the latest Diablo IV developer livestream update.
And in case you're wondering, I am playing it at 1.25 speed just so we can get through it a little bit quicker.
Invited me to come play the game for a few days, talk to devs, and then co-host a stream and ask some questions, shed some insight into my experiences. Adam Fletcher would typically host these updates, so I was there to be the relief. I was there to be the Rhykker to Adam's Picard. So in this video, I'm going to talk about that, my experiences with playing the game. So as I dive now into that, what's it like to play Diablo IV Endgame? I'm just going to say that this video will be more conversational, more live stream like, a little less edited than my regular videos, less edited, less produced, less.
So we're talking specifically endgame here. I was
given a suite of endgame characters to play. I got to play.
So we're talking specifically endgame here. A lot of you guys have already experienced the early game because we got to play that in the beta. But what's it look like once you get past that point? Okay.
Every class, the characters they had set up for me ranged in level from 45 to 75, and jumping in, the first thing that I wanted to do was take that level 45 rogue and go do the capstone dungeon. So to clarify, you finish the campaign. After that point, you can unlock the full suite of endgame content via completing your first capstone dungeon. That's how you unlock the...
So you guys start out here, right? Either adventure or veteran. I'm going to recommend that you guys start out at veteran, because if you beat the game at adventure, you do not unlock one of the locked difficulties. Adventure is just an easier form of veteran. So go through the game on veteran difficulty and defeat it here. Okay. And then what he's talking about is the capstone dungeon. The capstone dungeon is more or less like you've already beat the game, but this is your like rite of passage to show that, okay, like I'm ready for the next level. Let me unlock the next difficulty. So you have to beat the capstone dungeon before you can unlock the next difficulty. Okay. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with ARPG type games, this is how the progression in this type of game works. You don't just pick a difficulty, play it and beat it, and that's it. That's not the point of the game. The point of the game is to play it at the highest difficulty you have available to you, beat the game, and then you unlock the next difficulty, which is going to change the way you interact with the game. You get access to more things, more features, more gear, a higher level, more skill points, like all of these things. So Diablo is not a one and done game. You're going to beat it these 3 times at a minimum to really unlock your maximum power of your character.
Third world tier nightmare. But this dungeon is level 50. The monsters will not scale down to your level. So I'm assuming they gave me a 45 character because maybe that's the level I could expect to be when I finish the campaign. And if I want to go dive straight into that capstone dungeon, I should say that the gear that I was given was... The character was pretty well geared. Again, I was playing a rogue. It was my favorite class going into.
So his character had really good gear going into this capstone dungeon.
As I go into that capstone dungeon, I'm like, whoa, all right. This is significantly more challenging than I expected. It's taking long to kill monsters. And as I progressed my way through, I started to reach a point where I'm fighting these champion monsters and they kicked my butt. I died. And like I said on the stream, I'm one of those people that was saying veteran is too easy. Can we increase the challenge of veteran? My understanding is the capstone dungeon is intended to be reflective of nightmare difficulty. Now, what I should have done at that point, or what I should have done instantly, was realize, okay, I should go power up before tackling this. The game is telling me you're not good enough, but I treated it like it was Dark Souls. I really, really, really wanted to unlock nightmare difficulty, so I figured, okay, 45, I should be able to do this if I muscle through. I rode the struggle bus for far too long, I died far too many times, but I made it past those elites onto...
So this is like your skill check, right? Like this is to make sure that you're not just flying through the game and getting past parts into parts that you have no business getting into. Because what we experienced during the betas was a lot of like mob level matches your level type stuff, and then there was some like actual higher level mobs that you had to fight that like had like a set level to them. This is the point that stops you from going too far and getting ahead of where your character progression should be if you found ways to kind of weasel through the rest of the game. So he was level 45 doing it. It's a level 50 dungeon. You should be level 50 before you go into here, unless you're very experienced.
I don't want to give spoilers here. I'll just say there was a boss fight after that, and I had to learn the mechanics. Altogether, I had to go back. I had to do some upgrades. I changed my build a lot. I respecialized a lot into single target damage. This was even before, just to handle the elites. I actually went back to town and I fully upgraded all of my gear. I didn't change the gear that I had.
So that's something to think of too. You need to respec your respec yourself for
enough damage to actually take down
single target damage. And for multi-target damage, right? And he's actually talking about respecking. So it's kind of cool that you have to like think about that and possibly even do that, because it's always good to have like a really good challenge in a game and not just feel like you can easily slaughter through everything that you ever come up against, because it's going to feel like that a lot of times. And you're going to have times like this when you feel like you might need to change some of your skills around to be able to defeat a certain part of the game.
The boss fight. So overall, I would say that it's a gear check and a skill check. Now, I'm not a pro player. I am, I'd say maybe I'm above average. If you look at the grand scale of all players that play, sure, I'm above average, but I am nowhere near a super skilled player. In the beta, I hardly died. I pretty much only died against a Shava, just to give you some ballpark of, you know, I'm not total garbage, but I'm sure that there will be pro level players that will be able to handle that encounter with either fewer deaths or no deaths. But again, if you're hardcore, I would not just waltz in casually. And I think that level difference as well really makes a difference. Because my next capstone dungeon experience, the second one, to unlock the highest difficulty tier, I believe that's at 75, I was the same level as the dungeon. And that one went so much better. Despite it being the higher tier capstone dungeon, I was of the correct level. The initial part, I'll say I breezed through, but then the boss fight, that was a big challenge again. I overcame it, but I died multiple times. Again, I needed to learn the boss mechanics to understand, okay, when am I getting one shot here? I had to change up my build a bit to be able to survive one shots. And by the way, the respecking, while I didn't do full respecs, I respec quite a bit. You generate gold rather rapidly. Can you do full respecs constantly throughout the day? No.
So just don't forget that you can do this. Don't forget that you can respec your character. And it does not cost a lot of gold to do it until you get like to the very, very, very end game. So respec often so you can kind of find that groove, that vibe of your character, and like fitting your gameplay and kind of like the difficulty of what's around you, if that makes sense, and kind of the flow of the game.
No, but you could afford to respec quite a bit. Even at level 75, I was respecking things. I was earning back the gold. It wasn't a big deal. But again, I wasn't doing full respecs. I was redoing some Paragon nodes. I think I respec the whole Paragon board. I changed up.
He'll talk about Paragon board in a little bit.
Some skills, but I didn't completely alter my build. But yeah, I had to spec more into survivability to just sustain the fight. I had to learn to better play my build. That's another thing as well, right? I'm jumping in there with a build that I've not played before, so I'm learning how it works. I'm learning how the mechanics of the build work. I'm learning how the mechanics of the fight work. And again, I would almost advise a hardcore player, maybe just try softcore first, just to know what you're up against.
The hardcore community is not like him saying that. Hardcore players, those are the ones that, like, if you die, you're like permadeath. And in a game where you can get one shot, you have to be really good at hardcore to not just get like absolutely demolished and really like set back.
I'm going to be super impressed with all you hardcore players who are going to, on your first go, survive all these fights. In general, things are well telegraphed, but it's a skill check. You're going to have split seconds to react to what you're seeing. And if you're not spec for survivability, there will be one-shots. At that point, I was playing a sorcerer, and I basically changed my build.
Survivability is really important.
Shields every time I used a cooldown, and I was timing my skills in cadence with the boss's attacks to ensure that I always had a shield up whenever one of his attacks were coming. Because
so he's talking about like different classes are going to have different things for survivability, but you're going to want something that mitigates damage or eliminates damage altogether. And he's talking about how he would time these shields as a sorcerer, which make it to where you don't take any incoming damage during that time that shield is up, with the boss's attacks that can one-shot you. So it's really good as part of your like general skill building to think of like one or multiple things that you can have either via items or via skills that your character has available to mitigate or eliminate damage altogether for short periods of time.
I had a lot of difficulty dodging some of the boss attacks. And again, if you're off by that fraction of a second, bam, it was enough damage to one-shot me if I didn't have my shield up. So again, I wiped against that boss multiple times, but it felt so good to overcome the challenge and then unlock that highest tier difficulty. I would say that the capstone is on average more difficult than the average content of that world tier. That is, if you're just out, you know, in the open world, it's not like everything there is going to be as challenging as the capstone. That was another reason that I was trying to really muscle through to unlock it, because better loot drops in the next world tier, and that loot is then going to start powering you up more. Now, to clarify, you don't need to even do your first capstone dungeon to start doing endgame content. You just only get access to nightmare dungeons and Helltide once you are in the world tier 3 nightmare. Before that, though, you could be doing...
So there's your incentive to get past this, is to get access to Helltide, and I think Fields of Hate. No, I think Fields of Hatred you can get to earlier, but like there's a few things that you don't get until you get to the nightmare or the 3rd level difficulty.
The Whispers of the Dead. That's typically how you would get your first nightmare sigils. So nightmare sigils are used...
So here's your nightmare sigils. These are things that you like will apply to a specific dungeon to make that dungeon harder but more rewarding. So you'll see that there is the sacred and the ancestral nightmare sigil, and like these higher level sigils, they only allow you a very limited amount of revives, whereas these lower tier sigils allow you more revives. And like here it'll tell you like this one, reduce cooldowns 1 kill, that's like a benefit to you. So you get 1 benefit and you have 3 things against you: blood blister, monster attack speed, and monster vulnerability resist. So, and it's going to tell you, it's going to send you to a specific dungeon, which I think is what this up here is: Cultist Refuge, Sunken Ruins, Blind Burrows. So you're going to go to that particular dungeon. It's going to tells you where it is right here too. It tells you how many revives you have, what boosts you get, and then what negatives you get put upon you. And then, like I said, you get better rewards for going. So this is going to be one of those like end game pieces of content that keeps you playing the game over and over and over again, gives you ways to get better gear, get more levels, and overall give you just more of a challenge while you're playing so you can have more fun.
To open nightmare dungeons, you get your first of those via the bounties, the Tree of Whispers. In my case, I was given characters that had a full inventory of nightmare sigils, so that I didn't have to farm that stuff up. So nightmare dungeons will be a core part of the end game loop.
And you find those sigils in like certain areas when you play.
Tier 1 ones, they have different tiers of escalating difficulty. You get your first via the Tree of Whispers. Then after that, once you are inside a nightmare dungeon, you can get other sigils to drop. That'll be for higher tiers. So I'm running a tier 1, then inside...
So while you're using sigils, you're earning new sigils. So that way it's like a repetitive thing. If you want to keep doing nightmare dungeon runs, you don't have to necessarily go somewhere else to get the sigils and then go back into the dungeons. Like you can just chain the dungeons. Although he'll talk about later, like there's some restrictions to that.
And maybe I'll get a tier 2 or whatever, some higher tier, and it goes on and on. And that's generally how you're going to continue to farm your nightmare sigils. If at some point you're unhappy with the sigils that you have, you can break them down into crafting materials and craft your own nightmare sigils at the occultist.
So you can go to the occultist here, and you can kind of like scrap your sigils that you have down into sigil powder, and then craft with that sigil powder a higher tier sigil. So if you have 1 through 5 or some 6 through 10s, you could go ahead and like break those down into the powder and then craft yourself an 11 to 15 or 16 through 20. Generally, the higher tier that you go with the sigil, the harder the dungeon's going to be, the more rewards you're going to get out of it, though. So it's going to be this like balancing act of like, how strong are you to be able to take on these dungeons? And you're going to want to like match yourself up appropriately. You don't want to be able to go through the dungeon probably so easily that it's just like that, like it's not a challenge at all, because then you're probably not getting as good of a loot as you can. But you don't want to go in one where you just keep going in and like throwing yourself against a brick wall and dying and dying and dying and dying just to try to get through it, because then you're probably wasting your time and you're not being time efficient. Or you might even have sigils for dungeons that you don't want to run, and you can break those down and craft them into other ones and get a different dungeon too.
Either because you want higher tier ones, so you're gobbling down your lower tier ones to get higher tier ones, or you, I don't know, you hate the map, you hate the dungeon, or you don't like the affixes that roll, because there's randomization of the
the affixes too. Like it might have an affix that for whatever reason, like you just have a problem with defeating based on your class, your spec, your play style. Like it may have an affix that you're like, no, dude, like I hate this one. I do not want to fight against this blindness thing or the blood blister or whatever the affix is that makes the dungeon harder. So again, you can just kind of re-roll it at a cost to you.
fixes that roll on those nightmare sigils. Now, the sigils come in, I'm going to say tiers again. There's nightmare sigils, and then there are torment nightmare sigils. That's the main distinction. In the
Pretty sure he just made that name up.
You can die up to 12 times before you fail, and then in the highest tier one, again, I'll call them the torment tier. I don't know what the proper term is, if there is one. You can only die 4 times. And yes, all the
it was ancestral, I think is what they called it
right now. I get it. So you're farming nightmare dungeons in order to get more sigils to run more, and higher level nightmare dungeons to get more higher level loot. And also the main thing at the end of a nightmare dungeon is you're going to level up your glyphs. Glyphs are...
So he didn't fully explain this part, and I don't know if it's been explained somewhere else. I think it probably has, and I'm just missing it or not thinking of it. But basically you could have these glyphs and you level these glyphs up while, I think they're for your Paragon board. But you level these glyphs up from nightmare dungeons, I guess. I don't know if there's other places to level them up or not. But as you can see, like, they get higher level and they're going to have a larger radius size in terms of how many nodes around your Paragon board that they affect, and like the stat boosts that you get from them. So it's actually really important to level your glyphs up to make your character as powerful as possible.
Things that you insert into your Paragon tree. They're some of the most powerful things, in fact, once leveled up sufficiently, that you'll have in your Paragon tree. So a core part of increasing your character's power will come.
And just as like a pre like intro to you guys that don't understand or know what Paragon is, like, think of it as like a further advanced skill tree, to like just keep it super basic. When you're leveling up in the betas, you have a skill tree that you're going to like use to select different spells, abilities, whatever. You spend points on that. Later on, you unlock this Paragon board, which allows you to spend points on different stat boosts. He'll explain it later, but you get to like different nodes that give you different abilities, and it kind of like enhances your character further. It gives you just more customization on your character and more power.
From leveling up your glyphs, finding glyphs, first off, finding glyphs, finding the right glyphs for your build, and leveling them up. You can argue that it's similar to legendary gems in Diablo 3, but there's more complexity to it because you got to be inserting the glyphs into the Paragon board and in a slot that is meaningful. We'll talk more about glyphs in a bit here when we talk about the Paragon boards. Again, my main focus in playing the game was to understand, what am I going to be doing every day in Diablo 4? What is the experience going to be? Why am I doing the different activities that are available to me?
See, this is the really important part, and this is what makes ARPGs, good ARPGs so good versus like other genres of game, right? Like, you guys saw me play like Harry Potter, or there's like the new Star Wars game that's out, Elden Ring, like all these different games that are great games, like on their own. But like, for the most part, is you play it once, you beat it, and that's it. And a good ARPG doesn't do that. A good ARPG gives you so much to do and so many options, in especially if they could do it in a very clear way that's not like a detriment to the game. I can't find the right words here, but I think you get what I'm saying. Basically, it gives you so many options, so many paths, so many things to do once you get to the end of the game, that you just you're fine with playing it again and again and again and again. And, you know, if you play Diablo for a number of years, which a lot of people do, like, you're going to beat the game hundreds of times, potentially dozens of times, depending on how much time you put into the game. And like, you end up being okay with that, which is kind of weird from a game that has like a defined like beginning and end to it, but that's just how these games work. And from what we're seeing here, Diablo 4 is going to strike that chord just right, I think.
Now, on average, the difficulty in Nightmare Dungeons, not nearly the same as in the Capstone Dungeons. Capstone is definitely far more challenging. But Nightmare Dungeons as well, I mean, you effectively get to make them as challenging as you want, given that you could unlock higher and higher Nightmare sigils. So at baseline, the baseline sigils are easy enough to run. And if you want to be farming more rapidly and more efficiently, then you can run lower tier sigils. But again, you're rewarded because you only have a finite number of resources of these sigils. You are rewarded for not just doing the easiest content over and over, but rather for, I guess, tackling the content that you can efficiently handle. Efficiently, I suppose, an asterisk, as we figure out what efficiently means in this game. In Diablo 3, efficiently means 2.5 to 5 minutes. But all this to say that Nightmare Dungeons are certainly things where you don't have to be slamming your head against difficulty-wise. The most challenging things that I experienced were those Capstone Dungeons. Now, one concern I have about the Nightmare Dungeons is that in the seasons, we'll probably want to do all the Nightmare Dungeons, or all the regular dungeons rather, once, but only 30 will become Nightmare Dungeons every season, and that will rotate, so there'll be different Nightmare Dungeons every season. My concern, I can already foresee people complaining like, hey, how come we can only do these 30 dungeons out of the 115? Why can't you just let us do all 115 or however many dungeons there are in the game as Nightmare Dungeons? Again, this is something that we'll only really realize after we experience the season. We'll find out whether 30 is enough or not, and I'm sure if it's not enough, they'll be open to.
So one of the comments I saw on this from another player, which I thought was good, basically what he's saying is there's 115 dungeons that you could play through, just going through the campaign and the story of the game and just finding the world. But only 30 of those 115 can become Nightmare Dungeons. So like have actual replayability to go in and farm and get the special loot from. And his thought is that maybe people won't like that because maybe there are certain dungeons that you just like better than others. And he doesn't like the idea of the fact that you're restricted in which dungeon you can do. But I don't think he's thinking of the fact that you're kind of already restricted anyways, because you're going to get these sigils, right? Nightmare sigils, and it's going to select a dungeon for you anyways. So if you have 115 Nightmare Dungeons available to you, and you're just getting a kind of like luck of the draw of which one gets a Nightmare sigil, like you'll be lucky. Most players anyways will be lucky to do every dungeon once. They'll probably only do half the dungeons once. Whereas if you have 30 dungeons available to you, you're probably going to get repeats several times, and you're going to get familiar with these dungeons and learn which ones you just like better than others. So it actually gives you an ability to farm certain dungeons a few times if you want to. So I think 30 is a good, I think they could have even done 20, but 30 is a good number, because it does give you that level of it gives you enough to give you variety, but it doesn't pigeonhole you to like an extent to where you feel like you can't get any kind of like a groove going or like a rhythm going with them. You know what I mean?
Increasing that number. So that pretty much covers the Nightmare Dungeons. Then there's Helltide. And Helltide is where
Helltide's
you can
awesome.
Target farm specific item drops. We'll explain why in a bit, as well as it's pretty much the only place that you can get certain important crafting materials.
Materials.
The Helltide,
select your drops you can get.
Part of your core gameplay loop at the end. You have reason for wanting to do both of them, and there are things in each that you cannot get in the other. That said, it sounds like XP farming will not be relegated to one or the other. I asked about this and they said monster density should kind of be the same. So
this is good.
It's not like in Diablo 3, for instance, where
so they're trying to make it to where you don't go to just one area of the game to get XP, and that's the only area you go.
Pro gamers will find what is the most effective thing to do for XP farm, but from a design perspective, nothing is designed to be, oh, this is what you want to do to grind XP.
And a lot of like pro players will say like, oh, but like we're going to find the best place to do it and we're just going to farm XP there anyways. But like where there's some games that like there's one spot in the game like this is where you go to level up your character and get the most XP. Diablo's trying really hard. Blizzard's tried really hard to not make that a thing here. So while maybe somebody will find a method that's slightly better to getting experience points faster, that gap, that delta between your first best place and your second best place and your third best place is going to be a lot smaller. So whereas in a game of like Diablo 3, where maybe, and I'm just making this number up, maybe you get 30% more XP anywhere else by going to this one area. Therefore, everybody's going to go there because it's such a big benefit. If they find a spot here, like let's say it's the Fields of Hatred, where maybe the gap between first best and second best place to get XP is only like a 3% difference. And then second best to third best is another 3% difference. And then everything else is kind of like tightly knit behind that. Sure, like your like most hardcore players that like play, 50, 60 hours a week and are trying to speed run the game to get through as fast as they can. They might decide that they still want to do that number one method the most, but for only a 3% efficiency gain, you could also argue it's more worth it to go through and do a variety of stuff, if for no other reason than your own sanity.
So I think we don't have time to really dive too much into it, but Helltide has a bunch of random events that can spawn within it that are different and distinct from the random events that naturally spawn in that zone. So Helltide is basically something that takes over an existing zone in the game. in addition to having the regular monsters spawn there, it starts to spawn demons. And in addition to that, Helltide specific events, I think they override the regular zone events. So
I don't know how we tell this on the map yet.
There's also roaming monsters. Sorry, rather roaming.
Like it'll be a highlighted spot on your map, I guess. Like when you pull up the main map.
It's pretty challenging. It's not slam your face against a wall challenging, but there's a marked increase in difficulty within Helltide and outside of Helltide. And I think I could talk about this. It wasn't touched upon in the stream. Again, there was just so much to talk about and not enough time. But, well, first off, to lay the foundation. Within the Helltide, you are collecting cinders, and those cinders are used to open up different chests that are found throughout the Hell.
So we got capstone dungeons, we have nightmare dungeons, you have Helltides. I don't think he talks that much about the Tree of Whispers, but that's another one. It's like a questing system. And I don't remember if he talks about Fields of Hatred, which is like the PvP area, and he doesn't touch on world bosses here, but like basically you have all these things that are like in-game content, and he's kind of going over all of them. Helltide is going to be a fun one. Basically, you're going to pull up your map, and then every hour, 1 hour on, 1 hour off, I think there's 2 areas that are Helltide areas, or maybe it's only 1. And you travel to that area, you go into that area. That zone just has like much harder mobs. You're farming the area, and he'll explain it here, so I don't explain it twice.
Helltide, they spawn in random locations, so your flow of gameplay within Helltide is kill your way around, exploring to find where the different chests are. Every chest will have an icon above it showing a gear slot.
So you can pick the gear slot you're looking for.
It'll show you the cinder cost to open.
If all of your gear is good, but like you really just need a good pair of boots. Like your boots you have kind of suck. But then all of your other gear, like you feel pretty good about, Helltide might be good for you, because instead of farming loot in nightmare dungeons, let's say, where your pool is open to everything, maybe going into Helltide is going to be a better idea for you, because you can go and look for like just boots. Like I'm just going here to get boots, so you can like target farm that specific item.
Open that chest. So you're killing your way around, you're picking up cinders, and you're determining which chest do I want to open. Now and again, I think I could say this, there's one chest that's randomly within the area. I'm not sure if it always spawns, but it is not marked on the map. And it's like a
So the other chests get marked on your map, it sounds
it's
like.
It's some kind of uber chest.
And then you have this super awesome chest.
Typically, randomly roaming around the area near said chest is some uber boss.
So you have a badass boss that you have to go fight, get the badass item in the badass chest.
Encouraged to scout around, find things. Because again, if you die in Helltide, you lose half your cinders. They don't drop on the ground, they are gone. Helltide lasts 1 hour, so my first Helltide, I joined in with only 20 minutes left, so I only could farm up a certain amount of cinders. But you want to be making choices again on, all right, what gear slot am I target farming for? If you're searching for unique items, for instance, you know exactly what unique you might be hunting for. Maybe a Shaco, a Harlequin crest, rather. You're going to be looking for that, you know, okay, helm, I got to find the helm slot. I'm going to go for that. Or if you just have one slot that's really weak and you want to upgrade it, you can target farm for that. The odds of getting good rewards in general seems pretty good. And the spawn rate of Helltide seems to be 1 hour on, 1 hour off. So once one Helltide ends, the next one will start an hour later in another random location within the world. In the meantime, you could be doing your nightmare dungeons, you could be doing your whispers, you could be doing world bosses. And the spawn rate of Helltide seems to be 1 hour on, 1 hour Now, on the topic of the cadence of 1 hour on, 1 hour off, I will note that in general, I'm someone who likes to have full agency over what I have access to playing in a game. I don't know how big of a deal is it. I mean, especially now the way I play, it's not a big deal to have 1 hour off, but I used to be someone who wanted to just jump into a game, play for 15 minutes when I had time during the day. And I think if I were still that kind of gamer, I would be disappointed to hear, oh, I logged in, Helltide's not available right now. Here's one less thing that I have to do.
So basically 1 hour on, 1 hour off. His complaint about it is that like, well, what if I only have like 30 minutes to play? And I really wanted to jump into Helltide real quick, and I get on during that off hour. I think it's a good criticism to have, because like obviously like I'm playing like all day now, right? So it's not going to affect me, but like there's a lot of you guys that like you're going to have that, like you get home from work, like you're between the kids, like doing stuff with the kids and other family stuff, and like you might only have an hour, and then like you only intersect with that like Helltide for like 10 minutes, so it's not worth doing for you guys. I think that I can see that being a problem. He's gonna kind of recommend here that like they have like an item that you farm to like unlock Helltide and get in it. I think differently. I think what it should be is Helltide is there and available for you in 1 hour increments. And then once you do a Helltide, like once you go into a Helltide, a timer starts. That timer starts, you have 1 hour of Helltide being open. And then upon that timer ending, then there's a timer for an hour off. So they still get to keep that 1 hour on, 1 hour off thing going for them. But instead of it being based around a physical time in the real world, instead it's based on your time, the player. So I can get on, and let's say I get on and I have a Helltide available to do. I would go into the Helltide. I got my hour. I finish it up. And then let's say I log off for the night. I'm done. Okay. Then when I get on again the next time, I still have an hour to wait. So that way I can't just sit there and farm Helltide nonstop, hour on, hour off. Or maybe they even tie it to real world time, right? Like I do it for an hour and then I get off, but like the next time I get on, it's been more than an hour again since I've done it last. I can farm it again. Either way, I think would be fine to do it with the hour on, hour off. But at least if you do it this way, like the player has more agency to do it as often as they can do it based on their time and not like always feel like they're possibly missing out.
Maybe I get lucky a few days in a row and every time I log into play, Helltide is off. I'm not sure how much of an issue it would be to just have Helltide on all the time in different zones in the game. I suppose the concern there might be that if it's always on, then people might only do Helltide. But again, I'm not sure that's really much of a problem. If people want to do something, let them do it. The way it is now, I am okay with it. I'm just concerned if we're going to pave the way for a lot of things like this in the future that are all going to be on different schedules. One thing that
And also, I guess here's like something to support his theory is like, let's say like, well, we don't need to say it. Blizzard has said their goal is to kind of like, they're trying to like make sure they have a fine balance of everything. They don't want there to be a best place to get items, a best place to get XP. They want everything to kind of be equal so you can play the way you want to play. So if they've actually done a good job at that and made everything equal, then Helltide should just always be available. You know what I mean? Make it balance Helltide to where it's always available, and that's fine. And I think that would work. Jaden said, I like that idea, Prowl. Yeah, I think so too. I think there's a better way to, like, it's not the way they're doing is like terrible, like, you know, throw your hands up and like you're done with the game or anything like that. But like they could definitely do it better. So either make it available all the time and balance it accordingly, or make it 1 hour on, 1 hour off based on like your logged in time.
Started to find tedious in Lost Ark, for instance, was, okay, at this time this does this, at that time that does that, have a whole calendar. The game literally gives you a calendar in order to keep track of upcoming things and ensure that, okay, I go to this island to do this at this time, and then I go there to do that at that time. I just want to play the game whenever I want, on my own schedule, on my own time, and not be gated out of activities based on different times. If the concern is being able to do an activity too much, I would rather have some resource that I can farm in order to partake.
I don't
in
like the farming resource idea,
schedule.
though.
So let's say a Helltide key that you unlock, and then bam, you consume it, and now a zone becomes Helltide within your instance. For argument's sake, this doesn't have to be for Helltide, but for other such events. Some people suggest that for world bosses, for instance. And
I guess the only thing that would make this difficult,
end game
if you make it on your time,
how does that tie into progression?
Would be like if you're teaming. Like, what if I'm teaming? So what if it's my time? I have my hour now, but like somebody else that I team up with doesn't have their hour. How would that work? See, I don't think that would work. If it did work and you were both able to do it, like you were able to suck them into it, then you would effectively make it available all the time. So maybe it would just be best if it's available all the time. I think I've talked myself into that position. Make it available all the time, but balance it appropriately to where it's not OP to be open all the time, available all the time like that.
Well, this is related to sacred and ancestral items. So again, you're playing on veteran or normal difficulty. You have yet to unlock World Tier 3. You're only getting normal items. You're going to be fully decked out in legendaries, probably by the time you finish the campaign. Otherwise, before completing your first capstone dungeon, you'll likely fill in all those slots to legendaries. Hopefully legendaries that are helping your build. You might even be leveling up that gear at the blacksmith to make that gear more powerful, but there is basically a finite amount of power that you can get from items below World Tier 3. Once you unlock World Tier 3, then bam, sacred items can start dropping.
So keep this in mind, guys. Anybody that's going to be playing in this beta weekend or when the game comes out, but you played in the other beta weekends, they had item drops like 3 to 5 times higher. It's like some crazy amount. Like you were getting like the unique item drops, rare. I can't remember what they call it. Was it rare? item drops and even legendary item drops like crazy. Like it was raining. You know what I mean? It's not going to be like that now. They've tuned it down to the normal levels. So while you're leveling up to level 20, you are probably not going to get your character with all rare items or all rare items and all legendary items. You'll probably find a couple if you play a decent amount, but you're not going to just deck your character out. So just kind of keep that in mind. And he's talking about like the power of the items as it goes up into like the different tiers. Like it progressively gets more and more.
These items are going to be on average better than the gear you've been able to find up to this point. And this is when the gear stops leveling with you. You can get a drop that might be good all the way through level 70. So it's a little bit similar to Diablo 2. Once you complete normal, then you start playing on Nightmare, and now you get exceptional items that can start dropping. So again, the flow of progression is going to be you're pretty much maxing out your normal gear by the time you unlock World Tier 3, and then you're going to start getting upgrades again, and as you're progressing your way up to about level 70-75 to get World Tier 3 unlocked, which again, I'm sure like super pro players will probably...
Yeah, you'll be able to, Jaden, you'll be able to see what gameplay is like in terms of like IRL, like when the game actually launches play. They're launching it with the latest updates that they've put in. This will probably be extremely close to how everything will be at launch, minus some like last second like fixes and changes that they make.
Unlock it at higher, rather lower level than the rest of us. Mind you, they'll also be farming XP far more efficiently than the rest of us, so who knows, maybe they'll wait until the appropriate level to do it. But regardless, your flow then is sort of starting the loop all over again of gearing progression where, okay, well now you're getting your new drops you gotta start looking at again. In my case, I wasn't really upgrading my gear because I was given a full suite of gear that was appropriate for my build. And so legendaries were not raining from the sky. They seem to be dropping at an appropriate rate. I did see them, but the odds of getting a legendary that was good for my build was relatively low. So I would have to not only just find a base item that was an upgrade, I would also have to find a legendary essence to extract and put onto it, or otherwise just an item that was altogether really strong. Another thing I should clarify, the affixes on the gear that I had were also well suited for my build. So now I was in a position where the items that are dropping, if they're not rolling, you know, a bunch of good affixes, then it's a lot harder to replace just because some of the numbers are bigger when I'm losing some very important affixes on my gear, such as plus to skills. You do have a certain amount of agency in re-rolling.
Basically, he was given already decked out characters, so it's hard to find new items that were better than the items that he already had.
Character is called that lets you enchant an item and re-roll one property. But nonetheless, I was going from a build that pretty much had all the properties that were useful to me to then needing to find items that would have only one bad property that I can then re-roll into something good. I anticipate this to not be the case for most people. I doubt by the end of normal or veteran or whatever difficulty, I doubt you'll be in a position where your gear is perfect, and so it should be a lot easier to find replacements and gear upgrades as you move into World Tier 3. You will, however, start to face some decisions on, ooh, well, this is a much better weapon, I'm dealing a lot more damage, but I would lose a certain legendary power because I'm going to be swapping out this legendary weapon for a rare weapon. In the case of a weapon, I think the damage is generally worth it.
So re-rolling a single item property is a mechanic they are pulling in from Diablo 3. Yeah, you can re-roll a single item property to try to get a better roll on it. For those of you who don't know what that means, like when you find an item drop and it has like a certain properties to it, whether it be plus to skills, plus to like certain like stats or whatever, it's like random within a range. Like you may have something that can be, I'm just going to keep it simple here, like anywhere from like, let's say 10 to 30 plus strength, right? Now, that item it drops for you, maybe it rolls low. Maybe it only rolls plus 12 to strength. Well, you could take it to this shop in main town and re-roll that one stat to try to get better. It's still going to be random within the range. It could still be between 10 and 30, but you're going to pay that certain amount of gold to try to get it higher than the 12 that you have. Because maybe you love everything else on the item, but that one stat is not good. So you re-roll that stat to try to get it higher in that possible range.
Depending on what that affix, that legendary affix is going to be. And this is also now when unique items can start dropping at World Tier 3. Now, then once you unlock World Tier 4, this cycle effectively repeats itself. Now you're unlocking the highest tier, the ancestral items. And again, probably by the time you're there, your gear is in pretty good shape, and you'll now be able to start upgrading it once again. But I imagine throughout World Tier 3, it's not that all of your gear is instantly garbage. It's not like your World Tier 1 gear is, you just toss it all out and pick up everything and it's all upgrades. You will be holding on to stuff. Maybe there's going to be a legendary affix that you can't.
Agaras, is it only rerolling that stat, like strength for a higher strength stat, or will you be able to reroll to a different stat, like say strength for vitality? I'm not sure. I'm sure that information's out there somewhere. Were we even able to do that in the beta? I don't know if we've gotten to that point in the beta where we had access to that. So I don't know if anybody knows that except for somebody like Rhykker. But I'm not 100% sure.
Find again, so you need to hold on to a certain item that's key to your build. And similarly, moving into World Tier 4, maybe there's gonna be some unique you found in World Tier 3 at level 51 that you don't want to get rid of. Maybe that's your GG item for the rest of, all the way up to level 100. You might have a few gear slots that you're gonna be holding on to because, oh, I got these really good rolls, and yeah, even though technically better items are dropping, it's not like there's such a thing as gear score that.
Now, I want you guys not be tricked by this. There is such a thing as gear score. If you look at your items, it has like a power level number there. While you're starting to figure things out in the game, if this is a new type of game to you, it's okay to use that as a point of reference. But as you get later in the game, that number means nothing, because you have, what is most important is, does this gear have stats for me, for my build, for my skills, and does everything complement each other? That is infinitely more important than the number, the gear power level number that it shows at the top of the screen. That number means pretty much nothing. It's helpful to people maybe in like the first like 20 to 30 levels while they're figuring things out, if they never played a Diablo game before or an ARPG before. But after that, it's probably going to be a little misleading and confuse people and trick people into taking the wrong items.
Is more than just a number. It's not like a higher level item is inherently superior than a lower level item. Affixes will matter. It's just that the higher tier items, the ancestral items, can roll higher stats. Also, some uniques are going to be far rarer than others, is another thing to bear in mind. Now, I didn't get to experience this because it's only something that comes from months of playing the game, but it does sound like this is the god drop that I've always been hoping for. You have some items that are super rare, or at least more rare than all the other items, such that when you get one, you feel so awesome to have found it. This is something that I was hoping for D4. Sounds like it should be in the game. All right, now for the Paragon boards. I was someone who, when I first saw the Paragon boards, I guess a while ago, I wasn't terribly impressed with them. I just sort of had the idea that, okay, it's gonna be a board with some like random, selection of pseudo random attributes.
Yeah, it seemed pretty boring at first, like the original information they gave on it.
The only real interesting thing on the Paragon board, but I had my eyes opened when I saw the assortment. I think every class gets, I want to say 7 to 8 Paragon boards.
That's a lot.
They are all themed around that central legendary power. And that's the part that made them really interesting to me. I started to now, it completely changed my perspective on Paragon boards. I started to think of it more like, it's almost like an Ascendancy class in PoE, or a Prestige class in Dungeons & Dragons, or, Last Epoch has its specialization class as well, sort of thing. Not quite to that extent, because you can select eventually multiple boards, but on the Necromancer, for instance, like, okay, here's a board that is for the ultimate minion Necromancer. So that central legendary node does something very powerful. I think on average, the legendary powers on the Paragon board are more powerful than legendary affixes. So this is something significant. By the way, the legendary power or unique power on a unique item is a couple times. It's some multiplier on average more powerful than a legendary power, just to put some sense of scale in there. So you have, in order of increasing power, I believe you have your basic legendary powers, you have your Paragon board legend.
So basically, if I'm going to dumb this down for you guys, you're going to have like Paragon points that you earn later on, right? And you're going to have these Paragon boards, which will, I don't think he shows one here in this video. You can look them up though, which is basically, he might show it later on, which is basically like a board that you kind of like trail a path through, like with skill points that you spend. And you are trying to work your way to certain nodes that give you extra powers, including a legendary like power that's made to complement something that your class has, a type of skill that your class has. So you're going to have these different boards to choose from in terms of charting this path, right? And then you are going to then within that board specialize in certain things that help that particular like type of skill, or maybe even specific skill. I don't know how specific it gets. We'll have to see. But yeah, it's a way to like really customize your character beyond just the normal skill set.
Legendary node, and then you have your unique affix or unique legendary power that would be the most powerful of the three on average. But going back to the Paragon board, so again, you have your Summoner Necromancer. That
and one thing I heard from Kriparian, I think, I don't know where he got the information from, but supposedly the more points you spend in the boards, or the more boards you go to, the more points it costs to get stuff. So from what it sounded like he was saying, I can't remember how he phrased it, but like there is going to be a benefit to like waiting longer to get like certain boards. I can't remember. I don't want to slaughter what he said. I'll have to find that video at some point and we'll go over it.
Legendary power is something that is comparable to in design a legendary power on an item, but a little bit more powerful. And then you have your rare and your magic nodes that are thematically tied in. So the least interesting thing on the Paragon board is just the basic nodes, where it's just +2 different stats. And there's no such thing as main stat in D4. You could want different stats on your character for different reasons, whether you're going for more crit, or whether you're going for more resource generation, or what have you. Sometimes even your glyphs will make you want to build for a certain stat, because there are mechanics within the Paragon board that turn on or activate based on how much of a certain stat you have. So you might find yourself building a stat for the sole purpose of unlocking a better effect on the Paragon board. From a design perspective, this was the idea of, okay, in D2, for instance, there are certain items that you cannot equip unless you have X strength. They wanted to take that same concept, but make it less punishing and move it elsewhere. So they have it on the Paragon board where, well, if you don't have this amount of a certain affix, you won't get this more powerful bonus effect. So to use as an example,
so basically like the way like Diablo 2 is, for example, and a lot of these ARPG games is people like to min-max a lot. You put no points into one thing, you put a lot of points into something else when it comes to like not skill points, but like character attribute points. And if you don't spend your points right, you basically just ruin your character. And it leaves you actually very little options, because like basically, I don't know, it's like a barbarian, you would always add a bunch of strength, a little bit of vitality for health, and that was it, right? The Paragon boards is like their way of doing that, but making it less punishing and more like rewarding and fun and offering variety.
Example, on the Paragon board for the ultimate Summoner Necro, the legendary power could be something like your minions deal 10% more damage for each minion type you have, thereby encouraging you to use all the different minions and rewarding you for doing so. Then your individual rare nodes could be stuff like plus 15% damage to Skeletal Mage. And then the blue nodes could be something like plus 5% to minion armor. But they're basically all themed, again, outside of the regular nodes, they're all themed around the central theme.
So like you may come across a node that, or a board that like you really like let's say he's talking about necromancers, for example, and maybe your build as a necromancer is a minion build, or maybe it's a different one, but let's just say minion build, because that's the example he's giving. Well, when you get to that minion build Paragon board, you might fill in a lot of it. Whereas if you're doing a different board, you might just chart a path to like one specific node and then chart your way back out to get to another board. So there's going to be a lot of different ways to do this.
And fantasy of the Paragon board. Now, one issue with Paragon boards is you can't plan ahead. There's currently no...
Moldy said that's good, because I always worry I'm assigning the points wrong. Yeah, I mean, well, the good thing about Diablo 4 is like it's, especially like before getting to level 100, like it's not going to cost you a whole lot to respec. So you really don't have to go in as a newer player, or just a player that's just kind of curious and wants to play around. You don't have to go in too worried you're going to mess your character up. You're going to break your character to the point where it's not fun anymore, because you can always respec and you're not like heavily penalized for doing that. Whereas like other games, that hasn't always been the case.
No planner built into the game. So once you unlock the Paragon boards, well, now you might want to completely change your build, or otherwise, I guess what you would do.
And also, from my understanding, here's some like timelines that you guys can kind of think of a little bit. I want to kind of break this down too. So supposedly it's going to take about 80 hours to get through the battle pass. Okay, so about 80 hours of gameplay to get through the battle pass. We know the seasons are going to be 3 months long, so that's 90 days. So basically 90 days divided by 80 hours. So as long as you play, 80 hours divided by 90 days is if you played every day, you only have to play what, about 40, like maybe like 50 something minutes, 55 minutes throughout the day, every day, to get to max level in the battle pass, the season pass. Supposedly it's going to take 160 hours of gameplay to reach level 100, roughly. So then you're talking about through 90 days, about a little bit under like an hour and 45 minutes basically of time that you'll have to play every single day to reach level 100, max character level. Most people, I think most gamers, they say like on average game like 5 days a week. The game about 3 hours a day on the lower end, 4 hours a day, 5 hours a day on average. So let's just say 5 days a week, 3 hours a day. That's 15 hours a week times 12 weeks in a season. You're looking at 180 hours. So that's basically what you're like, how much playtime you're looking to put into the game if you're trying to get max level.
Is you would see what build am I running now, which Paragon board best fits the playstyle that I'm going for. Alternatively, you might say, oh, dang, this is a really powerful Paragon board, or now that you're seeing them all, you might decide, okay, I want to combine these, and I'll completely respec my build around the Paragon board. Overall, I definitely hope that at some point they can add into the game a Paragon board planner. I'm sure that there will be external resources, websites.
Yeah, planner would be really nice.
In order to do this planning.
Extremely nice.
Things are available to us within the game.
I imagine there'll be some out in the first, like maybe a few weeks after the game's up. Maybe even quicker than that.
Not everyone is going to go do that. Not everyone will go to these other websites and use build planners and whatnot. I feel quality of life stuff should be in the game itself and not have to come from the community. I love community resources. Don't get me wrong. I always love when the community comes.
Yeah, the more they can build into the game, the better.
But I think a lot of that stuff generally should be in the game by itself. One of the issues is that you can't look at what the Paragon boards are unless you are currently.
Yeah, it seems like an oversight. Hopefully they fix that before the game launches.
So it just makes it more difficult.
Like it'd be nice to be able to see what the Paragon boards are before you start throwing points at it, so you can kind of like plan ahead.
To plan when you can't be just bringing up a menu that shows you the Paragon boards unless you are literally in the process of adding a point to unlock a new Paragon board. But overall, I was someone who previously didn't think the Paragon system was that interesting until now I got a more holistic look at the Paragon system.
It seems like it's going to be pretty nice.
Far more interesting. So again, I got to play all 5 classes. Going into the week, my order of preference of the classes. Rogue was my favorite, followed by Necromancer, Sorcerer, Barbarian, and Druid and dead last, with the Barbarian and
he's just kind of talking class stuff here. I might skip this.
That I wasn't crazy about, and the other 3
basically
that I enjoyed.
Basically he's going to say here how like he liked certain classes more at first, but then like the way that his builds worked out like later in the game, he liked the Druid the best, he liked the Barb the second best, and that's just because of how well they scaled in the late game, plus a couple basic changes they made to these characters after feedback from the last beta. So that's it. I recommend all you guys go follow Rhykker. Great source of information about Diablo 4. I think he streams on Twitch as well. He puts these videos out every so often. Obviously, he's like really ingrained in the Diablo community. That's why like they brought him on. He was the only person that got to play this extent of the end game. And they did that because they wanted to give people information about the end game, because there's a lot of like longtime Diablo players that were really worried about it. So drop Rhykker a follow. Hopefully I added in some context for you guys in terms of like people that are newer to the game or maybe don't keep up with all the news and like everything is going on all the time. Hopefully this will serve as a like method or a vehicle for you to get that information that you've been looking for. So if you enjoyed this video and this reaction, make sure you drop me a comment down below. Let me know what you liked about it. Let me know what you're thinking about Diablo. Drop a like on the video and make sure you subscribe to the channel.